evening. Hello. Fáilte, welcome. Good to have you with us. If this goes well tonight, my name is Michael Daly. If not, you can call me Conor Carney. Anyway, we leave the jokes there. This is live. So, in all the times I've been doing these things, it's the first time I've actually been involved in one that is going out live. So, you never know what might happen. Thank you for clicking the link and joining us for the launch of The Cursing Stone, a novel by Tom Sigafoos. This is an Allingham-sponsored event. The Cursing Stone follows the fates of two men, Rory Mullen of Tory Island and Sub-Lieutenant William Gubby of the Royal Navy, as they converge in the shipwreck of the British gunboat HMS Wasp near Tory Island in September 1884. The good news for you is that you're not going to see an awful lot, or certainly not hear an awful lot more from me for quite some time, because the stars of the show are the author Tom and the editor of History Ireland, Tommy Graham, who will be interviewing Tom shortly about the novel. So Tommy is the guy with slightly more hair down to your left, as I see it in my screen, and Tom is that handsome, rugged guy with the very elaborate panel doors behind him. We're all a bit disappointed that you don't have a lot of books behind you, Tom, but we don't really want to slag it. Hello, guys, and welcome. I think you may be muted, so we will give you a chance to speak in a moment. Now, before we do that, we have something rather special to begin with. It's a photo essay by Emer O'Shea, and basically it's to remind ourselves why Tory is such a special place. And we have very special music as well. 14-year-old fiddle player Bella Nethercott provides the music for Emer's video. So we'll take it from there, watch the video, sit back and enjoy. It's 5 or 6 minutes long. Right, just taking off the mute there. So there you go. Special thanks to Emer O'Shea for that photo essay and to Bella Nettercutt on fiddle. Beautiful images, beautiful music. I should say, best laid plans. I got a copy of the book, so I've only started reading it. Looking forward to getting through it. I have read about the first 40 pages, so enjoying that so far. But just to tell you a little bit about the author, Tom Sigafoo, an American-Irish, American with Irish roots, a member of the Irish Writers Centre and the Irish Writers Union. His most recent work, of course, The Cursing Stone, an historical novel set in Ireland. Now, I was talking to Tom about, I suppose, past history and what he's done, and a lot of excerpts from this particular book have already appeared on the Copperfield Review, and he is also the author of The Pool of Darkness, which was shortlisted for the 2016 Penny Dreadful Novella Prize. He's a former chair, of course, of the Allingham Festival in Ballyshannon and has been involved in one capacity or another for the last 7 years. I'm sure all or most of you know Tom, and certainly I suspect if you're an Allingham fan, you have come across Tommy Graham. Welcome again, Tommy. Editor of the bi-monthly History Ireland, and he has moderated History Ireland Head Schools at the Allingham Festival since 2011. He's a history graduate from Trinity. He is one of Ireland's most prominent public historians and continues to contribute on a regular basis to national and local radio. So that's basically all I'm here to do is referee, and I have set up the two teams. For the real deal now, it's Tom and Tommy's show. And over to Tom Sigafoo. First, we hand over to Tommy Graham, editor of History Ireland, who will talk to Tom about the novel. And my understanding is that this chat is going to run somewhere in the region of 30 minutes. But I leave that to you guys. So best of luck. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Allingham, if only virtually. And I don't even have to leave the comfort of my own home. Anyway, Thomas, it's great to talk to you about this book. Now, when I started reading this, I just finished watching The Terror, right, on television, that miniseries, right, absolutely marvelous thing. And that is about the Franklin expedition to look for the Northwest Passage. And of course, the thing is, we know the ending, right? We know that Franklin disappears, and yet they managed to produce this gripping television series. And Tom, you managed the same feat in this case. So there's no spoiler alert here, guys. We know the ending. The Wasp goes down. So could you just tease out, Tom? I want to just tease out, what's fact and what's fiction in the book, and in particular, tell us about the Wasp, what happened to it, and indeed its backstory.
Okay. Well, to start with the ending, as you suggest, Tommy, the Wasp was foundered on the rocks at the end of Tory Island on the 22nd of September back in 1884. It was a British gunboat that had been carrying out two kinds of missions. One was to take humanitarian supplies to the island, and in between those missions, they were also assisting with evictions, people who'd fallen behind on their rent, and as I think it's no news certainly to the Irish people who are tuned in here tonight, that there was a long and sad history of evictions and poor treatment of the Irish tenants in those years. The Wasp ran under the rocks at 4 o'clock in the morning, broke apart and sank, and of the 56 men on the ship, 50 of them died. 5 managed to saw that the ship was heeling over and that the masts were actually close enough to the ground that they could scurry along the masts and drop off onto the island. The 6th survivor was the cook, who was the oldest member of the crew, and he was washed ashore into a little cove. The rest were just not so lucky.
Just tell me this, it seems a contradiction in terms. How could a ship be shipwrecked at the base of a lighthouse?
Well, that is one of the key questions which everybody who looks into the Tory Island situation has to figure out. And we don't know. We cannot say with any certainty exactly what happened that night, because while there was an inquiry, a court martial, uh, the the military court simply chalked it up to navigational error, and those records have disappeared from the Admiralty files. So
is that a coincidence, Tom? Is there a conspiracy here afoot, do you think?
well,
Of some sort?
it certainly makes you wonder. Was there? Will we? Certainly makes it impossible to know the exact truth. Now, if you just take the facts of the case, that the Wasp encountered this terrible disaster, and the rest of it has to be, you have to fill in the gaps with imagination. Now, the storytellers of Tory Island are brave storytellers, and they've come up with some remarkable concoctions and explanations. Mine is a combination of pulling together the best information I could, and also talking with as many people as I could on Tory Island, at the Lighthouse Museum, the Bailey, near Dublin, and particularly with Patsy Dan Rogers, of the late Patsy Dan, who, when he was king of Tory Island, was wonderfully helpful in providing ideas, information, and his extensive notes that I used to help to write the book.
But Tom, wouldn't it be true to say that just like the terror, right, what you do here, there's a combination of the rational and the irrational, right? I mean, in other words, there could be several different explanations.
Oh,
Again,
yeah.
Spoiler alert here, right? Because you do tease out in parallel the several. When you're reading it, you're thinking, oh, there's a possible reason. There's, I presume that's deliberate in your part.
Well, it is, and I think that there's actually my personal theory on this is that there was a convergence of improbabilities. There were things that happened on
just
the
repeat that. That's a great phrase, Tom. Sorry, just repeat that. A convergence. I must remember that one anyway. Sorry, I'll write that down. Right.
A convergence of improbabilities. I was trying to find a word for it, like something like chaos theory, but in fact, it was very unlikely that the youngest officer would be at the helm of the ship on the middle of the night in a storm. It was very unlikely that the ship would have gotten so close to the island when there was a lighthouse there that you could see for 16 miles. And even if you subtract a few miles for the storm and the overcast and so forth, it really staggers the imagination to think that a ship that was equipped with the finest navigation equipment of the day could still find herself in such a mess. The people that are involved in this are all fallible human beings, and so to think that they all were somehow or other doing something or distracted by something that permitted the catastrophe to happen, it's highly improbable, but it happened, and it's not unlike the stories we hear, we read about in contemporary fiction, the Tom Clancy stories, the stories of 7 Days in May and that sort of thing, where with all the care and all the planning that goes on in the world, that convergence of improbabilities can still happen. And
but you also leave open the possibility of the supernatural, though, because I mean the book is called The Cursing Stone, right?
Yes.
So can I tell you what, Tom, let's leave that. Could you just go back a few months before the shipwreck, right? And again, we're talking about the factual stuff. What was the Wasp doing on Tory? Because it visited Tory a few months before, didn't it?
It did in May, and I have an extract here that I can read in about 5 minutes time, and that'll perhaps set the scene for the rest of the story. The Wasp was bringing 2 wagon loads of seed potatoes to Ireland. The Quaker Church in England had sent the potatoes, and one of the Quakers, Brother Andrews, was on the trip to make sure that they were delivered as intended. Brother Andrews was about 50 years old. And
Tom, can I just interrupt you there just to clarify something, because you're into the realm here of superism, right? Which was a big controversy at the time of the famine and afterwards. In other words, the giving of relief in return for people signing on the dotted line, joining a particular sect. The Quakers, however, their record was exemplary, right? They never engaged in superism. In other words, any assistance they gave was no strings attached. Just to clarify that, because it is important in the extract you're about to read. But anyway, just keep going.
Okay. Well, just in fact, to reinforce what you're saying, Tommy, the priest on the island had helped write a letter, write a letter to request the aid from the Quakers. So that was, in this case, there was no.
So that actually happened. Tom, sorry, just to interrupt you guys, because I thought when in your book when you accounted how the priest applied, I was thinking, oh, that wouldn't have happened, right? The historian in me, and now you've told me that it's actually factual. The reason I say I thought it wouldn't happen, the idea of a Catholic clergyman cooperating in any way whatsoever, right, with people, kicking with the other foot, would simply not happen. But you're saying it did happen in this case, in fact.
Yes. And in fact, the story, there's the priest the actual priest who was on the island at the time, made many initiatives on behalf of the islanders with every resource, every source of help he could reach. Now, having said that, he also got into, as I describe it, as I reimagine it, I think he got in trouble for doing that, because his bishop rapped his knuckles pretty thoroughly when he heard about that. But anyway, to continue the story, the one other thing you need, the sub-lieutenant Gubby, the youngest officer, is age 22. He's been assigned to accompany 12 sailors as they push the potato wagons from Port Doon over to the schoolhouse in Westtown. And the thing you need to know is that both Gubby and Brother Andrews are seriously overweight. As they climbed the steep slope from Port Doon dock, Andrews and Gubby wheezed and sweated. The sailors pushed their ammunition wagons and tried to conceal their smiles, but Gubby could sense their amusement. He could see the wobbling parade all too clearly from the men's point of view. 12 lean sailors in the peak of physical health, led by 2 chubby, faltering men, one in the blue uniform of a British naval officer and the other in the black coat and flat hat of a Quaker. Pausing for breath as the road flattened out, Gubby admired the craggy sea cliffs. The island looked like it had been tilted, with cliffs on the north edge that dropped steeply into the water. The southern side, a crazy quilt of stone walls and green fields, ran downhill, and before it became beaches that eased into the ocean. You could see the island men plowing the fields with horses. And a dozen houses clustered at the foot of the slope. He could see another village near the center of the island, about a mile away, and a lighthouse was visible at the far western tip of Tory, a black, tall, cone-shaped building surrounded by a wall. Gubby turned to the Quaker. Why did the Society of Friends decide to send potatoes here? Well, the answer to that is that the people need them to grow food, but in fact, the situation is more complicated than that. In what way? Andrews stopped and turned to face Gubby. He waved his cane across the panorama of land and sea. Lieutenant, do you see this beautiful island of Tory? Well, yes, of course. Well, do you realize that we are walking across the site of a notorious massacre? You're joking. Not in the slightest. It was in the early 1600s, after the English troops had established control of Ireland. Most of the Irish chieftains had fled the country, but a few were still brave or foolhardy enough to resist. They attacked the garrison at Derry. Well, I've never heard of this. History is written by the winners, Gubby. The English were better equipped and better organized than the Irish. The rebels were defeated, and some 60 of them fled here to Tory Island. The English troops pursued them and slaughtered every single man on the very ground that we're walking on. Gubby looked at the unremarkable green fields and the dusty road. Here, he said, is there no memorial of this battle? It was a slaughter, my young friend. The memorial is in the place names of the field. One is called the Hollow of the People's Breath. Another is known as the Remains of the Men, in the Irish language, of course. I would venture that somewhere along this road we will find ourselves at the bank of the massacre. Looking at the seabirds wheeling overhead, Gubby listened to the murmured banter of the sailors who were pushing the wagon. It seems extraordinary, Brother Andrews, almost impossible, that men would slaughter each other in a place as fair as this. The Quaker paused to look directly at Gubby. Have you considered the implications of your commission, Lieutenant? I don't understand your question, sir. Andrews removed his glasses and drew a piece of cloth from his pocket to wipe them. He waited until the sailors and the wagons had passed before he spoke. Did you see those women in the houses back yonder? Yes, sir. Do you realize, Lieutenant Gubby, that someday your captain may issue orders to fire your ship's cannons at that settlement? Well, surely not. Well, for what purpose? That settlement might be accused of harboring a hotbed of insurrection and treason. The orders to destroy it might come directly from the Admiralty. Oh, you must surely be having a jest at my expense, Brother Andrews. Surely no civilized country. And if those orders are issued and you do not obey them, Lieutenant, you will find yourself clapped in irons for insubordination. And if one of the men fails to obey, he will find himself imprisoned or hanged. Gubby tried to collect his thoughts, but he was unable to respond. Andrews continued, you have sworn an oath to a military organization, Mr. Gubby, and the military organizations require absolute obedience. 250 years ago, you might have been assigned to slaughter those 60 Irish rebels. He replaced his glasses and put his handkerchief away. Happily, we find ourselves on a more civilized mission today. Shall we continue escorting our potatoes to the schoolhouse? They walked together for several minutes without speaking until Gubby broke the silence. Brother Andrews, yes? Do you not find it ironic that your mission of mercy is being carried out by the military organization that you condemn? Andrews broke into a wide grin. Sometimes, he said, in combating sin, one must join hands with the devil himself.
That's great, Tom. Thanks for that. Now, can I just ask you about this character Gubby, right? Because to me, he's the personification of English incompetence, right? But there's no malice in him. Have I got that right?
I think so. He's naive.
Yeah, but the problem with unmalicious, naive people is if they're incompetent, they can be as dangerous as the most malicious person.
Absolutely.
Right. So anyway, because an interesting, and I have to say, you do manage to get inside this guy's head because he's not exactly a lovable character, really. You know, you look at it objectively, yet you manage to make him human.
Well,
right?
I make him. He's the youngest son of a family of doctors, and his father and brothers are very successful, and he's struggling to try to do something well in life and to gain a little respect from his family and a little self-respect as well. He's based on a character who was, in fact, only 22 years old. Like this character, Gubby had accompanied the princes of the royal family on a cruise around the world, and it had rather soft postings. But because of his insecurities, he finds himself in this rather backwater posting of Western Ireland.
Actually, just something I forgot to say to the people listening, right? This is a bit like our hedge schools, guys. You're supposed to sit in class, sit up straight, pay attention and participate. So use the chat option there, guys, if you have any questions. I know one or two people have messaged us, but if you have any questions about what Tom is saying or what we're chatting about here, just let us know and I'll put it to Tom as we go. Now, one of the other things that I find interesting is in the way you look at the WASP, right? You explore the kind of class tensions. Like Gubby, for example, comes to this relatively privileged background. Some of the other crew resent him because of that. Then you have other members of the crew who I would describe as competent, you know, but competent, but only in their own area. They won't take any responsibility, you know, for anything outside their area. You know what I mean? So they stick very much to their own particular brief. I mean, how did you research that, Tom? How did you get it under the skin of that? You know, to get into the, you know, in other words, not a monolithic British imperial operation. These are all individuals, human beings with their own, you know, their own way of looking at the world.
Well, they had a couple of really good sources on this. There is a book called The Illustrated Social History of the British Navy, and it is a fine document that details some of the living circumstances of the sailors on the ships. In other words, instead of looking at the big trends in military history and so forth, it looks at the fact that, well, it had only been since 1870 that there was a universal education and relatively universal literacy in England. The sailors had to live cheek to jowl, and there was no privacy, no opportunity to get off and be on your own anywhere. They were really treated. They lived in these circumstances that reflected, I think, the attitude of the officers toward them, which was that they were just ciphers, chess pieces to be moved around, and in fact, one of the things, Gubby is reprimanded by the captain for being too familiar with the men. They want him to exert a little more authority and keep a little more distance. However, the officers, the senior officers, are not terribly friendly or helpful to Gubby, so he finds himself isolated between these two social groups.
No, but it rings true. Anyone who's worked in any job, in any office, right, knows the kind of personal politics that goes on, you know. Now, I just want to go back to, I mean, I think one of the things about that extract is it sums up many of the themes in the book. And one is that conflict between making your peace with the world as it exists, including the coercion of the state. Because what this ship represents is, this is the nuts and bolts, literally, of the coercion of the British state as applied to evictions and so forth. Because I mean, the Wasp itself is quite a modest piece of kit. You know, it's not a huge battleship by any means. But the point is, these were the type of vessels that actually implement the writ of the Queen, as it was then in various parts of the empire. You know, actually, can I just move on to Tory itself, because in many ways, Tory Island is a character in this book. Just talk to us a little bit about the tension, say, between the priest on the island and the islanders, right? What's your historical basis for that?
Well, for this, I want to thank Father John Boyce, who was the priest on Tory about 10 years ago when I was first researching this. And he pointed out that Tory Island was one of the last vestiges of Celtic Christianity. The rest of the country had been increasingly brought under the direct influence and direction of Rome. And so there was a real tradition on Tory of, we'll do it our own way. And not only was there, not only was this reflected in formal Christianity, but they also had their own kind of I'm trying to say, it's something similar to the Stations of the Cross, but they called it a turas, which was a walk around the island to stop at various places that they considered sacred. One of these places was a wishing stone down on the beach near the lighthouse. That particular stone also could serve. It could serve two kinds of purposes. It could be for good, or if you turned it the other way, it could be turned into a cursing stone. And of course, the invocation of the cursing stone is the very thing that, at least legend has it, that the Tory Islanders, that's what they did. They thought that the Wasp was coming to evict them. They thought that this was.
It's not a very flattering picture of the islanders, really, though. When I was reading that, in other words, you're not looking at this some cute, folksy kind of thing. There's a darkness here about this, isn't there?
Oh,
absolutely. An edge to it.
Absolutely. Well, the man. It turns out that one of the island of Tory was owned lock, stock, and barrel by a businessman in Manchester. He'd bought it from an earlier businessman, and that businessman had evicted 100 of the residents of Tory, just told them to move off the island, move them forcibly, because he didn't think the island was big enough to support all of them. In fact, the islanders left to themselves had developed a fairly sophisticated system of allocation of favorable land, and they would share it. One person would have a more fertile field than another one year, and then they'd switch it around, and there was the
Tom,
person.
was that totally informal, right? No, was that totally outside the law?
Well, it was what was called a modified Rundale system, and it certainly did not square up with the British concept of solid boundaries and valuations and taxes. The islanders reshuffled the deck as they saw fit. And there's an episode with an assessor where the poor man is nearly driven out of his mind because they're trying to explain this to him and he cannot make heads or tails of it. Not to mention the fact that they're all speaking Irish and the assessor doesn't have a word.
Tom, there's a few questions coming in here. Alan Titley asked the question, is there anything in Tory folklore about the event?
In Tory's folklore about the event?
Yeah.
It's it is one of the sort of a foundation myth of the island, I believe. It's certainly one that everybody believes is true, and they believe that the islanders did in fact turn a cursing stone to try to wish ill luck on the wasp. They believed this so strongly that several of the islanders confided in us that, oh, I know where the cursing stone is. The priest didn't throw it into the sea like they say. It's buried over here, over there, over there. They all had an idea, but no two islanders told us the same location.
Now, I have another question here from Finbar Rafferty. He wants to know, would all the crew have been English, or would some of them have been recruited, i.e. press ganged closer to Tory?
The press gang question is an interesting one. I don't think that anyone was, in fact, forcibly detained on the ship, as happened so many times, I think, in the Far East and in other parts of the world. Also, there are stories of that happening in Boston in America. Rory Mullen, the main character of the story, is in fact brought onto the ship. He's been granted a spot in an Admiralty-sponsored map school, a cartographer's apprenticeship, but he's loaned to the ship for reasons that he can't quite fathom at first. But it turns out that they want him because he's a fluent Irish speaker, and that has unfortunately, it comes in handy at the times when they're up to the WASP is being sent on its less desirable missions. But so the only person who's as far as I know, and as far as what the material that I read in putting the book together, the crew of the WASP were mostly, or if not 100% English, were 99% English, and no one was on the ship that I'm aware of who hadn't signed up to be there, except for my main character.
I think press ganging was gone at this stage. You know, I know, like in the 18th century, if a British Navy ship appeared in Dublin Bay, everybody scarpered. You know, they got out of town. You know, although occasionally press gangs would bite off more than they could chew and would end up, you know, under siege from a mob. You know, but leaving that to one side. Now, another question here from June Considine. She says, what attracted you to the story of the WASP, Tom? And was it difficult to work through the research and decide how to use it?
Well, they say one of the real benefits of working with the information on the WASP is that it is so sketchy. You can take the known facts and summarize them in a couple of pages, but to try to imagine yourself into the situation of the day, the things that people were talking about, the things they were interested in. That's where imagination, you can let your imagination run wild. However, there's something else that I'm fascinated with personally, and that is the history of technology. And it occurs in a couple of ways in the story. One is that the ships of the day are under a huge transition. They're going from wood to iron and from sail to steam. The steam engine had been invented back around 1776, and they were finding more and more sophisticated ways of using it to drive craft, including warships. And so, but the Wasp itself was a hybrid, and it still had all the masts and sails, as well as the steam equipment, the steam-powered propellers and so forth. If in fact the Wasp had been sailing under steam and they ran onto the rocks, they would have had a good chance of backing themselves off. But the steam boilers had been allowed to, the fires were banked, the boiler pressure was low, and it would have taken half an hour to build the boiler pressure up enough to be of any service. So I think that's a fascinating context, and one that again helps, those kinds of details help enrich the story. The other thing, if I might, there's just one other thing I think is interesting in this respect, and that is electric communications had just been put in place around the world. The Atlantic cable had been laid a few years earlier. There was cable connections to Australia, and now for the first time in human history, you could click a telegraph device in Dublin, and a 14th of a second later, there would be a corresponding click in Sydney or Melbourne. So it's a time of great transition, and I think we also live in a time of great transition. So I find I'm able to draw on my own experiences and the reflections of other people that I know in trying to reimagine the social and human context of the story.
Now, I have to say that this was a tremendous geography lesson for me as well. And by the way, this is my main criticism of the book, Tom. You need a map. In fact, you need several maps. I know just the man who do them for you, right? So for the next edition, and I'm sure there will be many, right? You want to include that. No, I tell you, I even though I'm from Ballyshannon, as people know, but I've never been to Tory. I put my cards on the table here. It's on my list. I have been to Clare Island though a few times, so I was familiar with the other end of the journey. Mm-hmm. One place I didn't even know existed, however, was Innishtruhal, right? I mean, I thought Tory was isolated. It took me ages to find on the map. It is in the middle of nowhere, Tom. I mean, how do people manage to survive there at all? Because it turns out that bit of the story is factual as well as historical.
It is. And Innishtruhal, I always thought it was Innishtruhal, but my pronunciation
Have I mangled it?
Well, I may have mangled it. There were some 40 people living on Innishtruhal at the time, very small holdings. There's a lighthouse there, and it's an important one because it's right there at the mouth of the bay where you go down into Loch Swilly and Moville, and it's the owner of the island, again, it was owned by some businessman, decided that it was just too much of a pain in the neck to keep chasing all these tenants for rent, so he was going to turn it into a sheep grazing area. One of the unsung heroes of the story is the lighthouse keeper on Innishtruhal. He shared his food generously with the people on the island who were just barely able to scratch out a living.
Now, we have a message here from Reuben O'Conloon, who says, the bell from the Wasp was recovered and is on display in Gallery Dixon, the former home of primitive artist James Dixon on the island. Yes. A number of the crew were buried at Kilulta near Gurtakirka, yes, in on Bunbeg, August on Tory itself, or bilingual here. There is a memorial at St. Anne's Church of Ireland Church, Kilulta. Anyway, thanks for that, Reuben. Just to say, by the way, the first time I ever heard of Tory Island was at school in the De La Salle School. Brother Fidelis taught us all Bodgin Ilamy, which later became a hit for Emmett Spiceland. And of course, the last verse of that is Brishui Dory, right? It has the same ending as your story. Tom, I just want to move on to just to wrap up here, right? I mean, I mentioned the difficulty you have trying to tell a story in which we know the ending, right? Mm-hmm. But you also have decided to bring this out in serial form, right? Now, how does that work, and why did you do that?
Well, the serial arrangement, I'm offering the book in serial form to people who will subscribe to it. on my website, www.tomsigafoos.com. And I'm doing this for several reasons. One is that as a self-published novel, this needs to, I'm using this in hopes of attracting as wide a readership as possible. But it's also because as when I was a kid, going to the library was a real joy to me. My family didn't have many books, and being able to go to the library and participate in the get the books, read them, take them home. It was that was extremely valuable to me, and I want to make that available. I think we should make literature available to everybody in as many ways as possible. So this is I can't afford to give a copy of the book to every library in Ireland, but we can make it available on a serial basis for people who can sign up and subscribe to it.
Actually, that answers the last question just came in there. You know, how can those of us listening today best support your efforts to share the Cursing Stone with more readers? You just explained it. So guys, get onto Tom's website, tomsigafoos.com, and you get all the details there. I just have to give you a bit of highbrow literary criticism here, Tom. This book is a rattling good read. That's all I'll say about it. And everyone should get a copy. Okay, Michael, back over to you. Michael is going to give us some details on the forthcoming Allingham. Are we going to have a live show? What, Michael? What's the story?
Blended is a very popular word. Blended, yeah. But I'm involved in the committee, and that word was one that we used about 2 months ago. And no more than the waves in Tory moving, things are moving back and forward, Tommy, in terms of that. So probably at a greater pace than I would have expected in terms of what might be possible. And I say that with another hat on me because I'm chairman of the Abbey Arts Centre in Ballyshannon, which would be obviously the host venue for much of what the Allingham Festival do. So I'm not saying it based on any factual basis, but I'm beginning to wonder, is there a real possibility that it'll be less splendid and more live than I would have? If you had asked me that question a month ago, I would have been even more careful, more cagey. Now, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but before I do my wrap up, Tommy, can I ask Tom a couple of questions that aren't specifically about the book, but are related to it, if you don't mind? Tom,
yeah.
I knew Patsy Dan Rogers through my work with the Donegal Democrat, and I mean this in the nicest possible way. You would take everything that he told you and you divide it in two, and then you would work out how much of what he was telling you was a good story, and may or may not have its basis in fact or fiction. Was that your kind of general sus with him? Because he never lacked for telling the story.
Patsy Dan loved a good story, and he told good ones. I think that the role of historical fiction is not to replace history. You know, for history, we go to the Tommy Grahams and the History Irelands and so forth. Historical fiction, to me, is there to whet the appetite of people to learn about what life was like and to try to imaginatively recreate a world that is no longer there. So I took Patsy Dan with a grain of salt, but I also toasted him, and I would celebrate the opportunity to pass along some of his stories. Brave storyteller.
Tom, the other thing I want to do is, and I know Tommy touched it, but I have a note here. I want to make it very clear to the people who are listening and to those who will pick this up, because this is recorded and can be accessed again. Let's make it very clear to people how they buy this book to cover costs that you have incurred. And the first thing I will say with my Ballyshannon hat on is that I'm aware that it's available for purchase in Novel Idea.
Yes.
So those of you who know the shop, it's a rare and fine thing that there is a bookshop of the quality of that in Ballyshannon or anywhere else. And the book is available there. So that's one thing I know about. Now, there are paperback and ebook versions also available online from bookstores like Lulu, Barnes and Noble. Is there any other simple message apart from the fact the simple thing would be, as Tommy said, to go to tomsigafoos.com to get your hands on it? And if you're paying money, what are you paying, Tom?
Well, you've already captured the channels that are there.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get into the position of purchasing, going to a kind of printer that would print 1,000 copies for you, and then have 900 of them sitting around the house here and trying to sell them out, and going through all the process of recording sales and worrying about taxes and so forth. That's why I've left the distribution of the book up to Lulu, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, and W.H. Smith. There are actually other bookshops that, if you go online and just look for Cursing Stone, Tom Sigafoos, they'll sell them to you at a pretty fair price. Some of them aren't even in this part of the world. There's an outfit in American Samoa that's offering it for sale. But I'm sure that when someone orders it from them, they just place an order with Lulu to have it distributed. There's that. And as you say, the subscription, I'm managing the subscription service. That is going to cost about 300 or 400 euro a year to keep that going. But I'm hoping and enjoying a little revenue from the direct book sales. So I'm hoping that'll balance out.
Okay, right. Well, I just thought it was important to give that a wee bit more time because, it's been a pretty interesting 50 minutes or so, and it would be a shame, not to do the selling piece as well, and why not? Now, to answer Tommy's question, and this is the plug that I have to get in for the Allingham Festival. Obviously, last year it was blended, and we had the Adrian Dunbar interview, which was great fun, and I was involved in that, and just a personal pleasure for me last year was my 14-year-old son, Ben, was involved in Farewell to Every White Cascade, Tommy, which was fabulous. It really, an amazing thing. And again, being very parochial, Farewell to Every White Cascade by Francis Harvey, it focused in on the change of the river in Ballyshannon and the hydroelectric scheme. And for those of you who would have a Ballyshannon leaning, we're going through a mini period of that in Ballyshannon. Every day I see dozens of people walking along the riverbank because it's not on the scale of the hydroelectric scheme, but there's a 30 million euro development going on the banks of that historic river. And a lot of the older people in town are reminiscing about seeing that kind of, very high, big cranes and all that sort of stuff. So that's going on in town at the moment. And that's just, by the way, they're building a new community hospital. It's a huge development. In terms of the Allingham Festival, remember, write this down. I sound like a school teacher. November 3rd to November 7th, there will be an Allingham Festival without a shadow of a doubt, whether it's live, whether it's blended, whether it's a mixture of both. You can hang your hat on the fact that that festival will go ahead. Now, I want to do my Barry McGuigan piece now, and I want to thank a few people, and I hope I don't leave anybody out because I should have checked. But the first thing I want to do is to thank the people who have clicked on and watched tonight. It's a Friday night. There's a lot of other things you could do. Where I am, it's not a bad night for a walk, but people have come in and watched it. And also, because it's done in this fashion, you'll see in a week or two's time, people will dip in and out of it. So thank you for doing that. Special thanks to the people who asked the questions. I have to, and you'll allow me this, I have to say that every time you ask that particular woman for help, photographically or with a video or anything else, the only word you'll ever hear from me, Marouche, is yes. And I think the quality of what she did with the imaging and obviously Bella Nettercott's music. Bella's only 14. A bill of boss to her, and a sincere thank you to Emer. Special thanks, Tom, and possibly you may want to do this before we go to the Allingham Festival for giving you the platform and making this happen tonight in terms of they came behind you when you asked for their support. And finally, for the guy who's making us look good and making me forget that this is actually live, Connor Beattie, who has been fantastic. He's the unseen hero in the background. So I think that's everybody. And the last thing I will say is thank you, Tom. I've never done one of these before. And thank you, Tommy Graham. I have seen you at work and you're a master. I've enjoyed it. I hope the hour has moved quickly for people. I think it's been fascinating. I think we could do more, but I feel that's enough for now. So well done, everybody. And all I will say is my last words. What's on from November 3rd to 7th? The Allingham Festival. Well done and thanks.
I would also like to say, Michael, thank you very much for hosting the evening. Thanks to Tommy Graham for a terrific series of questions. Tommy keeps us all honest and on our toes. Thanks to Connor Beattie, the unsung hero. And yes, there will be poetry and flash fishing competition. There will be music. There will be cultural events, and just exactly what they're going to be is still being discussed. But by God, there will be an Allingham Festival. So thank you all. Thanks to everyone tonight for joining in.